So welcome everyone to today's social system mapping on-ramp session for October 9th, 2023. Your hosts as usual are me, Christine Capra, and see, I'm confusing my identity, and Kara Martner, who's doing tech support. If you need any tech help, just ping her. For our agenda today, we have a really loose agenda. We'll do chat intros in a minute in Zoom. I'm going to go through, like I just said, I'm going to go, backwards that way. I'm going to introduce our share our introduction to what social system mapping is and to our theory of transformation. And then I'm going to just go through our sumApp. We have a community of practice map, and I'm going to go through our sumApp setup. We recently upgraded the survey, and so there's maybe some changes we could make to that. But I think what we'll mostly do is just sort of look at the interface between the survey and the map and answer your questions about how social system mapping works. Often we have, we'll do that. That'll be fairly informal questions and answers. And often we stick around for an extra half hour for informal conversation after the formal session. And today I'm going to cancel that, both so I can just conserve my energy a little bit, and because most of this will be a relatively open-ended informal conversation anyway. So in chat intros, let's have you go ahead or in the chat, let's start with, and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, your name, pronoun, location, whatever of that you would like to share. There are no, if I'm suggesting anything, it's never a requirement. It's always an invitation, and just do what you need to do to be comfortable. And if that means ignoring an invitation of mine, go right ahead. So we have Tushar from the UK. It's always fun to see where people come from all around the globe. And Julie from Jersey. Mary and Jim from the Bay Area. And Rebecca's in Maine now, and Amy's in Memphis, and Kara and I are in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Oh, Kara's in St. Paul, Minnesota now. She moved.
Oh,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what's one primary network that you're part of or working with? We generally assume that people show up here because they're doing some kind of network work, weaving kind of work. We'd love to hear what that network is, whatever stage of development it's in, what it's about. Social enterprise benefits from being networked, for networking. Okay, and then the last question I have for you is, what brings you here today? What was it about today's session, or just what we're doing in general, that is up for you at the moment? Great. Okay, so I'll just comment based on people's comments, ongoing learning, kinds of comments in the chat, that this is an emerging field. We are all always learning together. This is not, we feel like there's a ton of potential, and we are learning together how to access that potential. And so that's part of what keeps a lot of us coming back together, is to just our ongoing learning together. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and share with you what social system mapping is. For those of you who haven't been steeped in this for a while, it can be kind of a fuzzy label. And so I like to say that social system mapping is basically a mashup of a number of different kinds of maps. The foundation of it is a social network analysis map. So the network, the human connections are definitely what we're building on top of, but then we add in dimensions such as assets, asset mapping, sometimes concepts, sometimes strategies, sometimes concepts might be things like expertise, or you might call that an asset as well, elements of a system map, and elements of stakeholder maps. So it combines all of those. And so when you look at it, it can look like, I mean, there's visual similarities in all those kinds of maps. You know, there's dots and there's lines connecting them. And so when you look at it, you might say, oh yeah, I get this. I know what this is about. But while it's visually very similar to those other kinds of maps, it's different. It's different in that it has layers of all of these kinds of maps. Most of them are usually a layer with this kind of dimension, and then a different layer, a different map with a different layer of a different dimension. And because we're mashing them all together, a social system map is far more dimensional and complex. It also evolves over time than these other kinds of maps. So there's both more potential in it, but there's also more, it's messier, it can be easier to get overwhelmed by. And so it requires some skill sets in helping people understand and make sense of them. And so a social system map is online, it's interactive, it can be accessible to everyone in a network. It's iterative in that you can keep updating questions, adding new people, changing, options and questions. So it's iterative and emergent and dynamic. And so we like to think of it more as an ongoing collective practice than a product. So it's a process more than a product in our minds. And so why do we do all this? It's the whole point of social system mapping is to support systemic transformation. We are trying to use our maps to support a global movement that exists everywhere. I mean, not everywhere, but it's a movement that lots of people are part of around the world, to shift from systems of dominance, exploitation, and extraction to systems of connection, reverence, and regeneration. And so what we've learned in the last 20 years or so is that supporting systemic transformation requires two things. It requires strong networks, and it also requires that those networks include wise change agents. So strong networks of wise change agents are what we are trying to help generate and support with social system mapping. And that shift that I'm talking about from systems of dominance to systems of connection, then you can break it down into, say, there's two parts to that shift. One is what we like to call the relational shift, where we are changing the ways we are in relationship to one another. So going from a separate, hard-edged, independent, do-it-yourself self to more of a fuzzy-edged, aware of more beings and more interconnected and interdependent self. So this is relational, it's about belonging, it's about building trust, it's about including diversity, it's about being connected to the planet and the other beings on the planet, not just humans. And so that's a really important piece of the puzzle. But then there's another important piece of the puzzle, which is what we call a cognitive shift, which is where the wise change agents part comes from, which is going from a mechanistic worldview, an understanding of, everything's, you just make a 10-step plan and push the go button and everything will change according to plan, which we all know doesn't happen, to a more dimensional, more open, more complex, and ultimately a living systems or complex systems worldview. So we're shifting our mindsets from mechanistic mindset to a living systems mindset. So those are the two shifts that we talk about, social system mapping helping us to develop. And really, you can say that they're the same thing. They really are the same thing. Being more complex and living systems oriented is fundamentally makes you understand you need to be more relationally oriented and vice versa. But we see that often in change efforts, there's a strong focus on either one sort of aspect of this overall change or the other. So in some instances, people will be super focused on the relational shift and the trust building shift and the belonging shift and the inclusion shift. And that's absolutely crucial. But if they're not also starting to shift their understanding of how change happens in complex systems and getting wiser about how to influence systems, how to understand patterns, how to understand beyond multiple degrees of impact, beyond the sort of old mechanistic push button perspective. If they're not doing that, they're not going to have as much, they might have a great time, but their ability to impact systems won't be nearly as big as it could if they also gained a systemic perspective. Likewise, there's a lot of groups that just are looking at things from a systemic perspective, but they're not as focused on or as aware of the need for the relational perspective. So building relationships, trust, etc. So we like to say that a social system map is meant and can help us do work on both of those and toggle back and forth between them so that we're not just looking at it from one perspective, but we're looking at the different, we're seeing from both, and we're sort of toggling back and forth between both so that we're strengthening both. They're informing each other in a feedback loop. So we like to say social system mapping supports both shifts. So that's what social system mapping is and why it is at a very high level. And then you might say, well, okay, that all sounds great, but how does that work? Or what makes you think that's possible? And so I'm going to share that part. So this is our theory of transformation. And in any context, it starts out with there's some people on the ground who have some shared intention, some desire to make some system better in some way. They might know each other, but they might not know each other. They might be already coordinating in some way, or they might not be. But at any rate, someone can identify that there's this common desire to shift a system amongst some population. And then that among that population or among some people within that population, they begin to think that if these people were more coordinated and in a network, that their intended change that they're trying to, the systems that they're trying to shift, they would have more impact. Their intentions would ripple out and be more effective if they would be more coordinated and interwoven together. And at some point from this population or from somewhere, there will become a subset of the population that decides to take on responsibility to turn these people on the ground into a more networked, to help them become more networked and more sharing of resources and mutually supportive, et cetera. And so that's this. So in our previous graphics, the orange color is the code for relational. So these people start and these people could be anybody. They could just be volunteers from this group who feel really strongly about making this change happen in the world. It could be some staff of a nonprofit, or it could be a foundation that decides to fund a network weaving project. At any rate, these people who are taking on responsibility for weaving a network start to meet, start to get to know each other, start to think about what they want to do, how they might start connecting people up. So they start doing some relational work on their own, and they start at some point, they start doing some kind of convening work, relationship building, with the people on the ground. So gathering people together, starting to help them think about what they might want to do together, start to know what resources they have, etc. So this is all, they're working on the relationships, the relational shift. At some point, these people will start to realize that there's more information that they would like to have about these people on the ground, that they can't hold in their minds everything that you might want to understand about this group of people in order to help them become a stronger network. So they start to envision the need for something like a social system map. They might not call it a social system map. They might not have heard of a social system map, but they're starting to think, we'd like to know who's working with who. We'd like to know where there are gaps in resources, Julie, like you mentioned, and we'd like to know, what strategies people are focused on, what skills people bring to the table, et cetera. So they have this vision of some information they would like to gather or to have about the network. And eventually, if everything works out great, they come across us and they decide to make a social system map. So now the core people or the guardians, whomever, these people design a sumApp survey where they ask people from the network information about themselves and their relationships to one another. And in the beginning, this is probably, in an ideal world, we would design this whole thing with the people on the ground so that we're sure that we're representing the interests of the people on the ground, and we're representing the identities of the people on the ground, and we're asking the questions that help them move into the world that they're trying to create together. And so in an ideal world, we would start there, but often in reality, that's not possible given people's bandwidth, given people's experience with various kinds of data gathering or mapping tools. So we say we start where we've got the energy, where we've got someone willing to work on it, and we create an initial map where the people on the ground are providing the data to go into the map, and then they can all gather, look at the data and access it themselves. And in the beginning, it will mostly be these people, the core people, who will refer to the map and find ways of, things to convene around or introductions they might make. That at first, it will mostly be the core people who will use the map to help to build relationships and to continue to build out that relational shift that we talked about. Over time, these people on the ground will start to say, oh, I don't feel represented, and I think you should have asked this question, or those questions are problematic, and I think we need to reword them. They'll start to think of more, ways they might be connected, and they might want to be mapping that. So you'll start to get more input from the people on the ground about what the map should look like. So this is where we iterate. And so we will revise the map and ask people to go in and update their information based on the revisions. And so the data at this point starts to come closer to the core purpose of the network. It starts to become more aligned with the context and be less sort of generic and more specific to the needs of the network. So we see this data line getting a little closer to the middle, and we see there's more people using the map for relationship building, for finding shared interests, etc. And somewhere in here, what starts to happen is we start to, and throughout this whole process, part of the relationship building needs to be telling the story of the network and telling the story of how the map is helping to support the network, so that people are starting to see how sharing this information about themselves and their relationships is making the whole network stronger. And so they start to have a sense of the value of the map and what they can get from the map. And through that process, we start to begin to think, some of the questions start to become more complexity oriented or more systemically oriented. You can start to use the map to help people think, learn about complexity, and learn how thinking systemically can help them develop their strengthen the network. It gives people a chance to practice thinking differently together in a context that matters to them, with data that they're part of, that is relevant to them. And so that's where we start to say that the systems thinking, or what we color code as purple, the complexity thinking, starts to become part of the overall process of the ongoing practice of social system mapping. And then over time, the data gets closer to the context and more integral to the needs of the network. More and more of that, we're doing more sense making, more complexity thinking, using the map in tandem with the relationship building. And then eventually in our hypothesized mature state, everything is sort of aligning up together. So we've got relationship building lining up with our complexity, our systems shifting understanding so that we're more effective, and our data and our map is aligned with that. So they're all serving each other and creating more and more of an energy that moves the whole thing forward. So that, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and take a breath and just see if Tushar, Julie, if you have any questions you want to ask at this point before in a minute, I'll share with you just an overview of the technology, how this works, and then we'll dig into the actual map and tools for our community practice. But I'm going to pause because my breath needs a break and my voice needs a break, and give you an opportunity to chime in if you've got anything coming up for you.
I did have a question. If we could just go back quickly to the survey and how those questions are formed. I know that every purpose would require, the person wanting to do the study to be involved in that. But is there some expert guidance in the development of questions that are appropriately formed and really kind of get to the answers we're trying to get to? I feel like everyone in our field is so over surveyed. The idea of like an unnecessary question is like the difference between them doing the survey or just quitting and not answering another question at all. So it is really important that we don't like ask too many questions or ask things incorrectly. So I think, at least from my starting point, that's a place where I feel like I need some guidance with how to form the questions.
And are you talking about specifically right now? How would you do that? Or are you talking about in a generic sense? How do we?
I'm talking in a generic, like, I guess in a generic sense, we're not ready to actually embark on a mapping, to upload our data to create a map just yet. But I guess I'm trying to understand, we have a database of people, we know where everyone is, but we want to know what everyone knows and who knows each other in the network. And I guess I'm just not sure how to get there with the least amount of questions so that we don't over survey people and get them tired out.
Yeah, that's a sort of a chronic tension. And I think that in any particular context, I mean, for me, it's contextual. And in some contexts, it's more of an issue or more of a tension than others. And so so the things that I start with, well, I'll generally say, well, let's start with the obvious stuff, what you clearly don't yet know, and there's a clear case to be made that knowing it would be an improvement. I mean, so partly it's just if you're working with a consultant, like if you and I were working together, we would sort of talk through how, what your concerns are, how to think about this, and we would come up with, sort of a strategy for how to do this. But the truth is there's no perfect answer. There's never a perfect starting point. And so one of the ways I like to be really clear about is to just be clear at every step of the way. There's no command performance. People don't have to answer any question that they don't want to, or they don't have to answer everything all at once. They can come back. Is partly what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift from sort of a one-time survey idea to something that's a little more like a social network idea where, you keep things up to date, you come in, we try to reduce the ask by making everything live. So it's not like they have to start over ever again. It's just like when you add a new question or two, they can, that's all we're asking them to do is come in and answer those 2 questions. And maybe there's 3 new people. So we're going to say, do you know them or not? So we do our best, knowing that the most important thing is that letting people give feedback and input, letting them tell you how they feel about it and respond to it, and then acting upon that input by making changes and updating things is the way we're going to learn what's important and what's possible in this context. It's also the way people are going to get more comfortable with the overall survey and trust, or the overall map, and trust that this really is trying to be a reflection of them, even no matter what, like you'll do your best to start in it from a good place. But the truth is there's no perfect beginning. And so that's partly why it's iterative and evolving, is we just keep doing our best to move it in the right direction. And that might not be a very satisfying answer, but so I'll just see if you have other thoughts, and then see if anyone else in our community wants to respond to that or has thoughts that I left out.
I just wanted to say another idea to encourage people is to start with a small group of people, create the map so you have something to show, and people may get excited and want to do the survey. So
yeah,
it's not directly related to the question, but an idea.
Yeah. I mean, we do our best to start with as much input from everybody as possible. And Jim, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The thing that you said at the beginning about, starting with the obvious, what do we want to know about each other? Some of those things just bubble up. And Julie, you've already been doing a bunch of community building. And so, like, what's been successful? What kind of questions have really innovated people, not innovated, but excited people about knowing about each other? What are the things that you think they want to know each other, or the small group of people that Mary's suggesting? And then the other thing is, like, what do you think, in your mind, what do you think is going to move the group forward if they knew this and that about each other? So what's your sort of theory of systems change? And build those questions into the survey.
Yeah. Julie, is there anything you want to say about that before we move forward?
No, I think those are both good points. And definitely especially when you're working with a lot of artists, they are very visual people. So showing them something is a good convincing tool. And also to start with theories of change, or working from some kind of logic model that really specifically breaks down your objectives for the questions you're asking would help, I think, keep you on track when forming the survey. So I think those are both good suggestions. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks. Tushar, do you want to ask anything before we jump into the?
No, I'm okay. And thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and quickly touch on the technology, which is, it's fairly simple. There are 2 different platforms that we use for social system mapping. One is sumApp, which is the platform that my partner and I have developed and continue to develop. We've been working on it since 2016. The sumApp platform is a data gathering, so it's a survey tool designed specifically for this purpose, and this purpose only, of making social system maps. So it's made to be as user-friendly as possible for your network, for them to share their relationships, and to be and to keep your data intact and working properly. No matter how many times, you can just keep changing it, keep tweaking, and the data will stay clean and useful. And it's formatted. The data gets output in a format that goes straight into Kumu. Talk about Kumu in a second. But this is what's special about sumApp, is that it's designed to be formatted to work with a graph database. Most of your survey tools, you'll find, make certain pieces of this puzzle really hard. So we're gathering the data in sumApp, and we feed the data through a live link into the Kumu platform. Kumu is an online interactive graph visualization tool. So there will be nodes. The nodes will be the people in your network or the organizations in your network that you've surveyed. When you click on them, you'll see their survey information. We're going to do that in just a moment. And then so the data goes into Kumu. A mapper, someone who's familiar with Kumu, then will create views, subsets of the data that are sliced and diced and visualized in certain ways to give you certain, whatever pictures, whatever ways of looking at the data that are useful for you and for your network. So there will be some visualization work done in Kumu. And then once the map is working for you the way you want it, you can take a link from Kumu and put it into the sumApp, back into sumApp, so that your end users, your members, have only one platform. They don't need to go to Kumu. They don't need a Kumu account and to log into Kumu. They just go to their own sumApp link, update stuff, find the map right there, maybe decide to update a little more, go back over to those tabs where they can update, but they just have one interface. So I like to spell this out because it can look like it's one smooth interface, and sometimes people get a little ways into a project and discover it's not all right there. And I have to explain that no, there's actually two different, legally not connected, different platforms but we've designed sumApp to work with Kumu. So that's the mapping environment. And I'm going to stop here and go to, hang on. Go to sumApp, and let me just, so first of all, our community practice, the people you see here and more, there are other people too, this is the embed of the Kumu map. It's in the sumApp interface, but this part is Kumu. And what I was trying to say was, we have a community practice. We have, it has a very strong core, and then it also has a fairly big periphery of people who are interested in social system mapping, but not super active in the community. And one of the reasons we have this map is so that people like you who are thinking about doing social system mapping can put yourselves on our map and see how the interface works, give you some beginning ways of thinking about it, and then also use our map as an example for getting the code, for just doing your own design in Kumu of your own maps. So this is our community practice map. And so, for instance, if I click on a person on any of these nodes, now we can see their answers to the sumApp survey. So we can get all the answers, everything that they've told us about themselves. This is a view we call the directory view, which is meant to be as simple a view as possible. So we don't have connections on this view. It's just meant to be a visual directory of everyone in the network. You can also filter. So these are custom things that you add into your Kumu map, with a little bit of tweaking, and then people can filter on whatever the content is. So our content in this context is very much about learning how to do social system mapping. What skills do you have around social system mapping? How do you fit in your network? What kind of roles do you want to have in this particular context, etc. So those are, what broader networks do you belong to? Those are the kinds of questions we have asked here, but every network will have its own unique and context-specific questions. So this is a directory view. You can just see more about each person. We have other views. We have an offers and asks view, which is kind of like the asset map view where we've got here, these are essentially assets. These are skills. We're asking people who has, sorry, it bounces around a lot. Kumu tends to. We're asking, you know, we made a list of skills that people need for social system mapping. And we said, who has this skill? And we said, who needs help with this skill? And so now you can see that, let's see, for pitching map to prospective clients, we can see this strong green line, and these are all design decisions that we make. So email says he feels pretty confident about pitching a map to a prospective client, and Jonathan Sibley would like help with that because he doesn't feel confident about that. He doesn't quite know how to do that. So we can see who's got that skill, who doesn't have that skill. That's our offers and asks view, which works like an asset map. Sometimes the things you might have here are things like, you know, we have trucks, and we have meeting spaces, and we have, you know, like various kinds of material assets as opposed to just skill assets. Sometimes this is about funding, or anyway, lots of kinds of resources can be mapped in this way. And then I'm just going to go to so this is where we have sort of your classic social network analysis view, which is the relationships from among the people in the network. And if you click on a connection line, you'll see, so this is Lisa to Marianne, and she's saying the context the relationship lives in, how well, you know, what kind of relationship they have, their collaborators. Oh, and they were in the same master's program, so that explains that. And so there's, you know, a number of connection questions that we've asked in our survey that are answered here. So that's what the map looks like, and how you can, you know, we can filter on who contributes a lot to my development or who contributes somewhat. We can do various filters based on connection questions or based on the survey questions. And then I'm just going to show you the survey briefly. So it just looks like a basic old everyday survey. We recently did some updates to it. And those of you who are familiar with this, you might have noticed Tim last week updated the colors, because now we can change the colors in sumApp, so people can, you know, make them aligned with their own color schemes. And Tim did that with ours, and so now that's got our gray and orange. I'm going to stop and give you and just open it up and for questions, thoughts, etc. We'll just do a little conversation for a bit, and then we'll have Rebecca share some announcements if you're able, if you're willing, and wrap it up at the top of the hour. So especially Julie and Tushar, what's coming up for you? No pressure, but making space if you would like. Is there a maximum?
I did have,
Go ahead.
yeah, sorry, you're reading my question now.
Yeah. So in sumApp, so Kumu starts to get really hard to load at a certain point, and it's not an exact point. It depends on how dense the network is, but we in our experience, generally it's been that more than 1,500 members of a mediumly dense network, the Kumu won't it takes so long for the browser to load the data that it times out, and so it just doesn't work anymore. And so we set a limit in sumApp to 1,500 members, and that can be overridden for just a little small increase in price. And we need to have a conversation so that I know you understand that you could run into problems in Kumu when you might need to split your data up into different various ways. But so 1,500 is a general rule of thumb for max. And whether or not that's too many, really, I think that's, again, a contextual thing. I think 1,500 is an awful lot. And some people think they need 100,000. So for various reasons. So it's
No, that's helpful. We actually have right around 1,500 in our network completely, but I don't think that we would need to map all of those. I think we could segment that into smaller groups that would be more useful.
yeah. And just Amy and I are working on a map currently where they have 500 members, but it's so densely connected. It's a corporation, so it's different structurally, but they have so many connections that map loads really slowly, even though it's only like 500 members. So sometimes in a really dense network, it's even a smaller population. But anyway, other questions or comments? So let's do this. Just again, both of you, Tushar and Julie, interrupt at any point. Prioritize, feel prioritized, and like you get to do, jump in wherever you want. And so for the rest of us, we had talked about, we changed the survey, and frankly, I made this topic a while back. I think we were, the mapping team, Mary and Rebecca, maybe, and I were talking about changes based on the survey. And I just made up this topic to go in this OnRamp, and then got sick and haven't really given it much thought. So I'm just wondering if there's anything up for you guys about changes to the network or to the survey. I mean, I know we've looked at it before, and I will say that Tim made those changes, like the validation change ones, the URLs and the emails. He updated that. Is there anything about that stuff that any of you or people have up and want to touch on? This is kind of not a rich topic.
It seems a little bit in the weeds for the new folks we have, like the thoughts I have, not
Mhm.
question, but that's why I'm pausing, because I feel like it wouldn't really be responsive to the overall sort of focus today on introduction to the network. So
It wasn't a very well aligned topic.
Mm.
Maybe it's
Mm.
not that it wasn't rich, it was that it wasn't aligned with the openness to new people. But Rebecca, it might be, I mean, or we can just, so if you don't, let's do this then. Give one more moment just to see if there's anything up for anybody, and then you do announcements, and then we'll close. Does that sound? So especially to Tushar and Julie, if there's any last things you want to say before we wrap up. Questions?
Nope, I just want to say thank you. I actually have to hop on to another call, but this was really helpful. I appreciate it. And I'm sure we will be seeing each other again. Thank
Great.
you.
Good.
Mhm.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Tushar, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. I don't have any questions at the moment, and I'll just ponder on what I've learned today. I sincerely hope that we will meet again.
I missed that. You sincerely hope what?
That we meet again.
Oh, great. Good. Me too. Okay. Glad you could join us. Rebecca, do you want to just do a brief announcement thing just for our practice, since we're getting in the habit of it?
sure, coming up next Monday is a deep dive, and I don't have the specific topic in front of me. But we could talk a little just about how the deep dive sort of complements the OnRamp by taking a deeper dive into some specific topic on the second Monday of every month. I think it is. Yeah, third.
Third.
The third Monday. So let's see if there's any, okay, so, and Christine, do you want to say anything more about the topic? Have you picked us a topic for next Monday's deep dive?
Kara might remember.
We'll be exploring the ways that values or agreements could be incorporated into our maps. And this came out of a September OnRamp session based on what Sarah had shared with us.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And then on the 30th, we're going to have our third quarterly community building session. And that's just about getting to know, or primarily about getting to know each other more, because our participants always say that's one of the primary benefits of joining these conversations. So we welcome people at any stage of exploration of our community of practice in that session. And that's it for me for now.
How about the be on the community practice map?
And yes, if you are, anyone who wants to join, Carol will add another link for that.
So Tushar, if you would like to just put yourself on our map, you don't have to answer any more questions than are feel relevant to you. Again, there's no command performances, but if you'd like to just walk through the interface and see how the map works, Sarah will put a link to the opt-in form. Looks like you put in the Slack team also link.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great starting point for just getting a little more involved. And so Kara, I'm trusting you're getting that. Okay, great. And then once that's in there, I'm going to just, Tushar, we have a little closing ritual, which Julie's already gone, but what we like to do is just all of us unmute. I count down 3, 2, 1, and then we all give each other our blessings and our just our good wishes for the day. And so we'll do that in just a moment.
I shared the join the community practice map link right ahead of the Slack team.
Pardon me?
The community of practice link is right before the Slack team join
Oh,
link,
okay.
so we should be all set.
Okay, I see. So that link that says join the community practice map, Tushar, if you click on that,
Yeah.
put yourself on the map. Cool. Okay, thank you for being patient with me, everybody, today, and for Rebecca for doing the announcements. We're trying to get into a routine of making announcements, and so thank you for tolerating my prompting you. And thanks everyone for being with us. And so I'm gonna let's all unmute if you want to do this, and we'll just say 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much.
Happy Monday,
Thank you.
Have
everybody.
a
I
restful
hope you
day
have a
and
good
week.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Take good care.
Bye.